Have you ever wondered what would happen if you could design the perfect world from scratch? Picture this. You wake up in an endless white void with no memory of who you are. In front of you sits a mysterious interface labeled "Build Your World, Begin Here." As you click through the options, selecting laws, social structures, and distribution systems, a chilling realization hits you, yet you have absolutely no idea who you'll become in this world you're creating. This haunting scenario forms the backbone of one of philosophy's most powerful thought experiments, the veil of ignorance. But what starts as an elegant solution to creating a fair society quickly unravels into three profound questions that challenge everything we believe about justice, responsibility, and morality itself. John Rawls, the brilliant American philosopher who conceived this thought experiment in his groundbreaking work, A Theory of Justice, understood he was presenting an impossible ideal. The original position, as he called it, was never meant to be achievable. Instead, it serves as a philosophical North Star, a direction to point toward, even knowing we'll never quite reach it. But this impossibility reveals our first devastating problem, the problem of fairness. If true fairness requires a completely neutral perspective that no human can ever achieve, then how can we ever hope to create genuinely fair systems? Every law we write, every policy we implement, every judgment we make, comes from our inherently biased, self-interested position. Think about it. When politicians craft legislation, they're influenced by their upbringing, their social class, their personal experiences. When judges interpret laws, they bring decades of accumulated perspectives to the bench. When we vote on social issues, we're voting from the specific vantage point of our own lives. The wealthy person voting on tax policy sees it differently than the struggling single parent. The healthy individual has a different perspective on healthcare than someone battling chronic illness. This creates a paradox at the heart of democracy itself. We strive for fair representation while acknowledging that every representative brings their own unavoidable biases. We seek equal justice while recognizing that every judge interprets through their personal lens. We aim for impartial decisions while accepting that true impartiality might be a philosophical impossibility. But the veil of ignorance reveals an even more unsettling truth about our existence. None of us actually chose our starting position in life's game. We didn't select our parents, our country of birth, our genetic makeup, or the historical moment we'd enter the world. Every advantage and disadvantage we possess traces back to this cosmic lottery of circumstances beyond our control. This realization introduces us to the mind-bending concept of moral luck, first articulated by philosopher Bernard Williams and later expanded by Thomas Nagel. The idea is deceptively simple yet profoundly disturbing. We assign moral praise and blame to people for outcomes they never truly controlled. Consider this scenario that perfectly illustrates the arbitrary nature of moral judgment. Picture 4 different bars on a busy Friday night, each hosting its own drama that will unfold in eerily similar yet devastatingly different ways. In the first bar, Tom finds himself in a heated argument that escalates to violence. He throws a punch, catches a few in return, and both men are ejected by security. Tom walks home with minor bruises and an adrenaline rush, probably forgetting the incident within weeks. Down the street, Larry experiences an identical situation. Same argument, same escalation, same decision to throw a punch with identical force and technique. But when his fist connects, his opponent stumbles backward, strikes his head on the concrete floor, and dies from the resulting brain trauma. Larry faces manslaughter charges and years in prison. The only difference between Tom and Larry, pure chance. The angle of the fall, the hardness of the floor, the precise point of impact, none of these variables were under either man's control. Yet society assigns vastly different moral weight to their identical actions based solely on these random outcomes. That circumstantial moral luck cuts even deeper. In our third bar, Marcus reaches the same boiling point as Tom and Larry. He winds up to deliver the same punch with the same intention, but at that exact moment, fire alarms shriek through the building. The distraction deflates the confrontation, patrons file outside, and Marcus receives zero moral condemnation, despite harboring identical violent intentions. The fourth scenario presents perhaps the most challenging case. Stephanie throws the same punch as Larry, with the same fatal result. However, during her trial, evidence emerges of severe childhood abuse and a recent diagnosis of borderline personality disorder that compromises her impulse control. She receives psychiatric treatment rather than prison time. This raises uncomfortable questions about moral responsibility. If Stephanie's traumatic past reduces her culpability, what about Larry? Did he choose to be the type of person who gets into bar fights? Did he select his genetic predispositions toward aggression? Did he control the parenting style, socioeconomic conditions, and cultural influences that shaped his personality? When we trace Larry's actions back to their origins, we find an unbroken chain of causes extending far beyond his control. His genetics were determined before birth. His early childhood experiences shaped neural pathways before he could make conscious choices. His education, peer groups, and formative experiences all influenced his development in ways he never directed. This is what Nagel calls constitutive moral luck. The recognition that our very character, the foundation from which all our choices spring, results from factors entirely outside our influence. If we are not the ultimate authors of our own personalities, how can we be truly responsible for the actions that flow from those personalities? This line of thinking leads to a startling comparison that challenges our entire framework of moral judgment. Consider how we treat a violent dog versus a violent human. When a dog attacks someone, we don't hold a trial to determine the animal's moral culpability. We might put the dog down for public safety, but we recognize it as a practical measure, not moral punishment. The dog simply lacks the capacity for moral reasoning that would make blame meaningful. Similarly, when a tornado destroys a town, we don't convene a jury to determine the storm's guilt. We take protective measures against future tornadoes. But we never consider moral condemnation because tornadoes operate according to natural forces beyond conscious control. Yet humans exist within the same natural world, subject to the same laws of cause and effect. Our brains operate according to biochemical processes. Our decisions emerge from neural networks shaped by genetics and experience. Our thoughts arise from electrochemical reactions we don't consciously direct. Einstein captured this perspective beautifully when he wrote, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space." He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. If we accept that humans are part of nature rather than separate from it, operating according to natural laws rather than transcending them, then the distinction between human moral responsibility and natural causation becomes much murkier. This doesn't necessarily mean abandoning all concepts of justice or accountability. We might still impose consequences for harmful behavior, just as we might quarantine a dangerous dog or build tornado shelters. But these would be practical measures for social protection, rather than moral punishment based on ultimate desert. This brings us to our final and perhaps most fundamental challenge, the problem of moral knowledge. Even if we could somehow achieve perfect fairness and resolve questions of moral luck, we'd still face the daunting question of what morality actually is, and how we can know it. This dilemma traces back to David Hume's famous is-old problem from the 18th century. Hume observed that we cannot derive statements about how things should be purely from statements about how things are. Facts about the world don't automatically generate moral obligations without some additional ethical assumption, bridging the gap. Consider the various sources humans typically use to ground moral principles. Religious and spiritual doctrines offer moral guidance, but their authority depends on the truth of the underlying religious claims. To know that a moral principle is objectively correct, because it comes from divine revelation, we'd first need to know objectively that the revelation actually came from a divine source. This creates an infinite regress. We need moral knowledge to evaluate religious claims, but we're trying to derive moral knowledge from those same claims. Emotional responses feel compelling as moral guides. When we witness cruelty, our disgust seems to point towards genuine moral truth. When we see kindness, our admiration appears to recognize real goodness. But emotions vary dramatically between individuals and cultures. What triggers moral outrage in one society might be perfectly acceptable in another. Emotions are shaped by upbringing, cultural conditioning, and personal experience. Hardly the stuff of objective truth. Science and reason seem like our strongest foundation for moral knowledge. Philosopher Sam Harris argues in The Moral Landscape that science can determine moral truth by identifying what maximizes well-being and minimizes suffering for conscious creatures. This approach feels solid because it's grounded in observable, measurable phenomena. But even this seemingly objective approach smuggles in a crucial assumption that we ought to maximize well-being and minimize suffering. Why should the flourishing of conscious experience be the ultimate moral standard? Harris and others simply assert this as obviously true, but obvious isn't the same as objectively proven. Moreover, the concept of objective moral truth faces a fundamental problem. Objective means independent of conscious observation or experience, minus true, whether anyone thinks about it or not. But morality seems inherently tied to conscious experience. Without conscious beings to benefit or suffer, to prefer or reject, to experience pleasure or pain, what would moral statements even mean? This creates a paradox. We want morality to be objective, but morality only seems meaningful in relation to subjective conscious experience. We want moral truths that exist independently of what anyone thinks, but moral concepts like justice, compassion, and rights only make sense in the context of thinking, feeling beings. Faced with these three interconnected problems, means the impossibility of perfect fairness, the pervasiveness of moral luck, and the uncertainty of moral knowledge. We might feel tempted toward nihilistic despair. If fairness is impossible, responsibility is illusory, and morality is groundless, why bother with ethical behavior at all? But perhaps there's another way forward, one that acknowledges the absurdity of our situation, while still finding meaning within it. Instead of seeking perfect solutions to these philosophical problems, we might embrace a stance of universal compassion, compassion for everyone caught in this strange predicament of human existence. Think about it. None of us chose to exist. None of us selected our starting conditions. None of us designed the rules of the game we're all playing. We find ourselves thrown into existence, trying to make sense of an often senseless world, doing our best with incomplete information and biased perspectives. This shared condition of cosmic bewilderment creates a basis for compassion that doesn't depend on solving the problems of fairness, luck, or moral knowledge. We can extend understanding to both those who seem good and those who seem evil because we recognize that all of us are products of forces beyond our ultimate control. Importantly, this compassion doesn't require passive acceptance of harmful behavior. We can still resist injustice, protect the vulnerable, and work toward better outcomes while maintaining compassion for everyone involved, including those we oppose. We might quarantine dangerous individuals for social protection while recognizing their humanity and the circumstances that shaped their dangerous tendencies. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, captured this perspective perfectly. Boundless compassion for all living beings is the surest and most certain guarantee of pure moral conduct and needs no casuistry. Whoever is filled with it will assuredly injure no one, do harm to no one, encroach on no man's rights. He will rather have regard for everyone, forgive everyone, help everyone as far as he can, and all his actions will bear the stamp of justice and loving kindness. So where does this leave us in practical terms? How do we navigate daily life while acknowledging these deep philosophical uncertainties? Perhaps the answer lies not in resolving these problems, but in learning to live thoughtfully within them. We can strive for fairness while acknowledging our limitations. We can hold people accountable while recognizing the role of luck in their circumstances. We can make moral decisions while remaining humble about our moral knowledge. This approach requires what we might call philosophical humility. The recognition that our perspectives are necessarily limited, and that absolute certainty about these fundamental questions may be impossible. But humility doesn't mean paralysis. We can act decisively while remaining open to new information and different perspectives. We can design institutions that acknowledge human bias, while still striving for fairness. We can create justice systems that balance accountability with recognition of circumstantial factors. We can make moral choices while remaining open to the possibility that we're wrong about moral truth. Most importantly, we can extend the same compassion to ourselves that we extend to others. We too are products of circumstances beyond our control, trying to navigate an uncertain world with imperfect information. The mistakes we've made, the limitations we possess, the biases we carry. These are part of the human condition, rather than personal failures. These three philosophical problems, fairness, moral luck, and moral knowledge, don't have neat solutions. They're not puzzles to be solved, but rather ongoing challenges to be navigated. They remind us that the human experience is fundamentally marked by uncertainty, limitation, and interdependence. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Perhaps these problems exist, not to frustrate us, but to keep us humble, compassionate, and connected to one another. In recognizing our shared limitations, we find grounds for mutual understanding. In acknowledging our uncertainty, we create space for dialogue and growth. The veil of ignorance may be impossible to achieve, but striving toward it can still guide us toward more inclusive and compassionate policies. Perfect moral knowledge may be unattainable, but the search for it can still inspire us toward more thoughtful and caring behavior. Complete fairness may be impossible, but the commitment to fairness can still drive us toward more just institutions. In the end, perhaps the greatest wisdom lies not in solving these philosophical problems, but in learning to dance with them, to find meaning and purpose within uncertainty, to act with conviction while remaining humble, to pursue justice while acknowledging our limitations. After all, we're all in this together, Maya's conscious beings, thrown into existence, trying to make sense of it all, doing our best with what we've been given. And maybe, just maybe, that shared condition of beautiful, absurd, uncertain humanity is the most solid foundation we need for building a more compassionate world. This recognition doesn't solve the philosophical problems, but it offers something perhaps more valuable, a way to live meaningfully within them, connected to one another through our shared bewilderment and our common hopes for something better than what we've known.